This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Today's ChangeMaker is Dr. Karen DuBois-Walton, the president of Elm City Communities and the Housing Authority of the City of New Haven. Karen's team serves over 6,000 families and over 14,000 individuals through their public housing, housing choice voucher, and low-income housing tax credit programs. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Katie. It's great to be here.
So let's start. You're a trained clinical psychologist with a degree from Yale and a master's and a PhD from Boston University. That's such an interesting and applaudable progression. How did this journey lead to affordable housing?
You know, I get asked so often how a psychologist ended up sitting in the seat where I am currently. And in some ways, it does feel like sort of a circuitous path, but also in other ways, it feels like it makes a whole lot of sense. You know, the work that I'm doing around housing development and operation and management is fundamentally all about the people. And it's about creating communities and spaces that help people to thrive as opposed to the kind of spaces that we're just barely surviving in. And I think that's very much aligned with being a psychologist. I started out training and wanting to do work that helped families who were experiencing pretty significant traumas. And I did that early in my career and wanted to make a pivot into policy work. I wanted to sort of go upstream. And I think about that as that image of somebody at the bottom of the river pulling the babies out, and after pulling a number of babies out saying, let me go upstream and figure out why these babies keep coming down the river. And that's really what I wanted to do, is figure out how we could create policy that created situations where families weren't having to survive traumas and circumstances that just provided them with too little. And so I moved into sort of public policy in the state government and then in city government, and housing I found to be just the sweet spot. Great place to be able to create communities, work with families around where they are now and where they want to be, that dream, and then put in place the kinds of supports that help them get there.
You know, one of the things the National Pandemic Care has unveiled is that the triggers of housing instability can be such a trauma moment for people. And for those of us who've worked in affordable housing for decade after decade, we've always known that. And we've seen, you know, how the trigger of this trauma just really sends a ripple of instability in the individual, in the home, and, you know, in the children. And this pandemic has just affected so many people's instability in housing. So I'm sure that your background, you know, you see the person, but you also see the background. And it's fascinating that you said that, you know, you want to help people thrive. And we think of affordable housing as just kind of a safety net, but it really can be much more than just a stabilizer. You know, you really want people to thrive. So, you know, what are you seeing in your communities now as far as being able to overcome, you know, whether it's in healthcare, education, you know, more than just the unit? What are you seeing as really being that stabilizer or being that program that helps individuals thrive?
Whether you're a layperson or a trained psychologist, I think so many people connect to that idea of Maslow's hierarchy, recognizing that until those things at the base of that pyramid, which are your real basic needs, until those are met, your ability to feel safe, to have your housing needs met, to have food and shelter, until those are met, we can't expect people to really be making progress on those higher order aspects of their life, their aspirations and their dreams and their goals, and relationships and all that. And so that's really how we approach it. It's like once we've gotten people's housing stabilized, we give them the opportunity to begin to work on so many other aspects of their lives. Families, unfortunately, because of the shortage of affordable housing, have tended to be on our waiting lists for a long period of time before they're actually housed. And so when they finally get housed into something that they can actually afford, something where they are paying a reasonable amount of their income toward their housing costs, It frees them economically to think about other things. It frees them emotionally to think about other things. And so that's where we like to meet them. Now that that piece of your life has been stabilized, what do we need to partner around such that you can make some investments in yourself, in your education, address educational gaps, pursue the next certification, pursue the degree you want, get into the apprenticeship program, deal with the health issue you weren't able to deal with, or the behavioral health issue that had been impacting your life. What can you do with your children now that housing is stabilized? And so we really dream together with the resident about where they want to be, and then begin to address what are the barriers that have gotten in the way. What are the things that they need to be working on in order to move forward? We're able to leverage a whole host of community partnerships to get our residents linked into resources here in New Haven. There are things we bring right into the communities and we provide the funding for and enable our residents to connect to. And out of that, we see really impressive growth in terms of families' financial literacy and wherewithal. People that have completed programs, computer literacy growth, completed GEDs that they didn't think they were going to be able to, complete college courses and graduate with college degrees, save toward home ownership and get their keys to their home ownership unit, celebrate their children's accomplishments, all things that really were not possible while they were struggling to figure out how they were going to pay their rent and keep a roof over their head when they weren't in something affordable. So it's a great way, I think, to think about how do we really support families being able to move forward once housing is stabilized.
I love what you mentioned. You said you wanted to dream together with the resident. I mean, that really is strength and empowerment right there. And such a holistic and comprehensive approach to affordable housing. One of the things you mentioned, education, and you've always been a strong advocate for intertwining education and housing partnerships, and you've even been appointed to the State Board of Education in Connecticut. How does your role in Elm City contribute to the work that you're doing on the Board of Education?
Well, housing policy and education policy to me are so closely linked, not just here in Connecticut, but in, across this country. Where families are living in many ways determines the kinds of educational opportunities that are available. And unfortunately, we see that our communities here in Connecticut have been very segregated by income, very segregated by race. And you find that the better resourced communities tend to not be the places where affordable housing is prevalent. So I think in order to think about how are we going to move forward to reach the educational outcomes that we want for all children in this state, we also have to be thinking about how are we creating housing opportunity for all families in the state. And so it's important for me to encourage many different systems to think about how they intersect with housing policy if we're going to really make a difference in poverty policy, right? If we're really going to be addressing and moving families out of poverty, we have to link how we're siting and zoning and developing affordable housing with how are we thinking about workforce development, how are we thinking about healthcare equity, how are we thinking about education, pre-K, K-12 education policy. And so for me to get a seat at the table with those who are making decisions in those other sectors, I think it allows us to think beyond our silos and think in ways that really can play off of each other to make decisions that can help move us forward in ways that can move families economically forward.
There's such a crucial link between early education and academic advancement. If you didn't get invited to a seat at the table, I appreciate that you're walking in the room and grabbing your seat, because this is an important system that has to be a part of the conversation of affordable housing. And so tackling that issue, I'm sure that translates into you making sure that your agency has programs and initiatives, trying to help children in your communities.
Oh, absolutely. Children are my first love. When you say that, you bring to mind one of my sheroes, Shirley Chisholm. And I have a little pin that I wear of her that has a folding chair, and it's a reference to her quote that, right, if they don't invite you to the table, you bring your folding chair and you show up on your own. And that's what we've been doing here. Is there for years, people didn't really think about inviting the public housing entity to the table on a whole host of things. And we have just shown up with our folding chair and created our space at the table to the point that now we are very much invited and thought of to be part of collaboratives around things that go well beyond housing, because people are beginning to recognize those intersections. My love was to work with children and families, and that continues to be my first love. And what we need to do here is break cycles of poverty for families. We do not have anywhere the number of public housing units or Section 8 vouchers to be able to meet the need in this community. And that means we've got long wait lists. And so we need to make sure that we are serving families and pouring into families such that they have more opportunities and can move on so that we can reach another family on the wait list. And I think one of the greatest ways we can ensure that the next generation of that family we're housing now doesn't need to be on our wait list in the future is by partnering with families to really pour into the children. And so we have a wonderful youth initiative that we call Elm City Community Believes, and it reflects our belief in our young people and our belief in their potential and our belief that none of us made it anywhere without other people creating opportunities for us, opening doors, granting us some resources, making some connections for us. And so we, as the housing provider, are partnering with families to do that so that their children can have the same things that anybody else dreams for their children. Quality education, starting with early childhood. We actually start during pregnancy and prenatal with trying to make sure that our families are connected to Healthy Start pregnancy programs and Well Child programs so that they start out strong, get them into quality early child care settings, that we provide supports for our children while they're school-aged and in their adolescence. We have great youth leadership, recreation programs, academic support programs, tutoring programs, mentorship programs, all with the intent that we'd like for our kids that are growing up with us to graduate high school ready for college, ready for a good paying, well-benefited job, ready for the military, whatever the next thing is, that they'll be ready to do something that it provides them a self-sufficiency income, and that they won't need to be repeating a cycle of poverty and seeking affordable housing in their next generation.
You mentioned such a comprehensive and holistic approach to affordable housing, and it's also one of my pain points, if you will, because when the programs are only funded for housing authorities and practitioners to be property managers, then it really short sights, if the proration and the formula and the funding is, less than 100%, it's trying to force a whole industry to just be concerned about the roof and the unit. And even then, that's not adequately funded, but it is so much more than just the unit. It is everything that you mentioned. And for you guys to try to tackle this and find resources in the community and make sure all of your people are aware of this, then that produces a true community. And so you guys are pushing the limits here on what you can do, but it also just really highlights why you guys have to be adequately funded to be able to make these types of collaboratives work, or to make sure that, the resourcing is in place for everybody living in your communities.
I wish as a country that we would begin to budget in a way that reflected a value that recognized that everybody has value and everybody needs some opportunities created for them. And we would break out of some of this siloed approach to problems that are very intersectional and should not be treated as siloed kinds of issues to deal with. A lot of what we're able to do is because we have this great flexibility under the Moving to Work designation, which is a HUD designation that has allowed us to experiment here in New Haven, along with a select group of other housing authorities across the country that have also been designated as Moving to Work. And it's a demonstration program. It's meant to experiment on the ground with ways that we can use that federal dollar a little bit differently, experiment in ways that might create greater housing choice for low-income families, might create opportunities for greater self-sufficiency, and might use the federal dollar more effectively. While I think a lot of housing authorities would love to be able to be doing as much as we do on the self-sufficiency side, the very extreme limitations on the funding and the inadequacy of the funding that is provided to housing authorities really prohibits that. So it is really because we are moving to work agency that we've been able to grow our self-sufficiency programmings to the extent that we have.
Along that theme of talking about the people, I read that you and your husband, Kevin, started a Storytellers of New Haven series to actually bring a diverse group of people from all over the city together to learn more about their neighbors. What ripple effect have you seen that's come up from that?
Oh, you have done your homework. This has been such a pleasure and a joy, and something that we have built together, starting out of just our own passion and desire to use story in a way to connect people to each other's humanity, with the idea that we could build stronger community. We started it in November 2017, and our country has been going through such a period of divisiveness and difficult rhetoric and so much othering rather than connecting and building community. And we had been in an experience that used story in a really beautiful way to create a sense of community and connection. And we said, let's see how we could continue this in our beautiful little city of New Haven, and just made this offering. And, you sort of plan a party and then you hope people will come to it. That was sort of our thing. We said, I don't know if anyone else is going to connect to this. And our very first one, our inaugural session, the room was packed. And we said, oh my gosh, other people are hungry for this. We said, let's keep it going. And we kept it going through that year, and people were still hungry for it. And so we're, 3 years in now of a monthly gathering. We've had to be virtual during the COVID pandemic, but people still come and participate through our virtual platform. The real foundational idea is that there's so many ways in which we have been programmed to see each other as different, and to believe in that difference, that we don't have something in common, whether that's across age demographic or racial and ethnic demographic or income and socioeconomic status demographic or religious demographic. And the reality is that when we get in these rooms and we share story, that there is, without exception, opportunities for people to see somebody who they may have thought was so different from them and hear something that resonates so beautifully, is similar, or something that evokes an emotion that is such a similar or familiar emotion. And out of that, I think we connect and we see each other's humanity, and we have seen people meet and make connections that they never would have before. We hope that it's shifting from a sense of othering in the community to more of a sense of we're all in this together. We all are a piece of this beautiful tapestry of humanity, and let's operate from a space that is inclusive and not exclusive.
All right, well, we need to stop right there. But coming up in the second part of my discussion with Dr. Karen DuBois-Walton, the president of Elm City Communities and the Housing Authority of the City of New Haven, Karen talks about the moves that could be made to radically change affordable housing in her community.
I think we need to make some policy decisions that reflect a value that we believe that people are entitled to, a safe and decent place to live that they can afford. And I think that would be a pretty significant shift in federal policy and state and local policy, but it's one that would align our budget with a value that really values people.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.